All right, good morning again, everyone. Okay, so we're now going to begin getting into the story itself. So you either need to have your hard copy of Gatsby, right, with you as we're going through the opening chapters, um, or you can pull up the digital version. There's plenty of free PDFs. Like I said, I'm using this one here, which is I just typed in Gatsby free PDF, and this came up. And it's great. It's large, and you can annotate on it. You can follow along. All right. So please have your books open as we begin. And I'm gonna use this Prezi in addition to those opening chapters to kind of help me out here. Okay. So I'm just going to expand. All right. So this is a picture of what would be considered Gatsby's house, right? So it's very similar to the one that's used in the movie version. Talk about wealth, right? Okay, so we need to talk a little bit about the characters we're going to meet in the book. So obviously, Jay Gatsby is one of the main characters, hence the Great Gatsby, right? So what do we need to know about him? He is a self-made man who lives next to the narrator, Nick Carraway, and he's still in love with his girlfriend, Daisy Buchanan, ex-girlfriend from years and years ago, Daisy Buchanan. All right, so Nick Carraway. So Nick is a really, really important character because he's the narrator of the story. All right, so he's the one telling us the story. He becomes really important, obviously, because we're getting the story through his perspective. He is he lives next to Gatsby, but he also happens to be Daisy's cousin. So Daisy, the girl that Gatsby's still in love with, is a relative of our narrator, Nick. He's from the Midwest, which becomes very important because one of the major themes in this book is going to be the difference between the Midwest and the East Coast. And because he's from the Midwest, he is definitely a fish out of water, meaning he is not comfortable in social circles. He doesn't fit in very well with the crowd that is that he falls into while being on the East Coast. And so he often is on the sidelines listening and giving us an account of events because he doesn't quite know how to get involved in them. Daisy is, of course, like I just said, Nick's cousin and Gatsby's ex-girlfriend. She is married to Tom Buchanan, who Nick knows from college. He is extremely wealthy, and with that wealth, he is extremely selfish. And he is all about money. He believes that his money makes him better than everybody else. So he is materialistic. I'm sorry, he is. She also is very selfish, wrapped up in herself, and seems to be fixated on material things as well. All right, Tom, like I was saying, went to Yale with Nick, married Daisy, is old money. We're going to come back to that in a minute. He's racist. He believes his money makes him better than everyone else. He is hungry for power and wants to control everything. And even though he thinks he's better than everyone else, he's having an affair with Myrtle Wilson. And Myrtle is married to George Wilson, who owns a auto mechanic garage shop. He is from the very much lower blue collar situation. So Myrtle is a really sharp contrast to Daisy. So we need to keep that in mind. Why is he having an affair with Myrtle when he has Daisy? And she believes that she's going to marry Tom. Of course, Tom's married. The other character is Jordan Baker. She's the other female character in the story. So Jordan is a friend of Daisy Buchanan's from down south where they grew up. She was a childhood friend of hers. She is a professional golfer. So remember in the introductory materials, I talked to you a little bit about changes for women during the 1920s, and this is one of them. She's able to make a living as a professional golfer. She is also old money, and her and Nick kind of have a little bit of a summer fling. And we'll talk about that as it comes up in the story too. So Jordan Baker is, also in the mix, and we meet her pretty early on. Okay, so this is super important. The setting of the story. The setting, 1922 in New York. So it moves between going into Manhattan, New York City, and being on Long Island. And when they're on Long Island, they are in the two fictional towns of West Egg and East Egg. And in chapter 1, we get a pretty good description of the two eggs. All right, so please note, West Egg and East Egg are fictional. They are not real places. They are based off of ideas that exist in New York, but they are not real places. Okay, so West Egg and East Egg are fictional. All right, so taking a look at a map of what it would look like if West Egg and East Egg actually existed, right? So, get my pen. All right, so up here, if you go back out. All right, so here's Manhattan is New York City, right? So that's what we think of when we think of New York City. You think of Manhattan, but New York is actually made up of these 5. What do you call them? Boroughs, 5 boroughs. Okay, so they are made up of Manhattan, Staten Island, Brooklyn, Queens, and the Bronx. Okay, and out here would be the Hamptons, and the Hamptons are basically what West Egg and East Egg are based on. All right, so East Egg and West Egg. So East Egg is where I can't get my East Egg is where I don't know what happened there. Sorry, guys. East Egg is where the Buchanans live. West Egg is where Nick and Gatsby live. Okay, so Gatsby and Nick, West Egg, and the Buchanans are in East Egg. And they are separated by Long Island Sound, which comes in between them. That's the body of water, right? This whole body of water is Long Island Sound. In order to get to Manhattan, you have to kind of travel down this way and cross over the bridge into Manhattan. And Queens and Brooklyn and the Bronx tended to be more working class communities, whereas out on the eggs would be wealthier communities like modern day Hamptons. Okay, so this just gives you a little bit of a visual idea where what we're talking about. Okay, so now the important part we have to remember is East Egg, where the Buchanans live, is going to be considered old money. All right, and West Egg, where Nick and Gatsby live, is going to be considered new money. All right, so we have to talk about the difference between old money and new money. The Jazz Age, we talked about that last week, so please keep all of that in mind. And we talked about the themes. Okay. All right, so this is what I want to talk about. So this is a very significant, we would call it motif, a recurring idea that lends itself to a theme in Gatsby. So we have old money versus new money. Okay, so we need to have some understanding of what that means. Okay, so old money. Old money means that the money that the family has been passed down from generation to generation. We're talking family wealth. So that it's not made, the current holder of the fortune did not make the fortune. All right, they might have increased it, but they didn't actually make it. So Tom Buchanan is old money, meaning his wealth comes from his father, which came from his father, which came from his father. In the 20s, there were a lot more people around that would be considered old money. The Rockefellers, the Eisenhowers, the Kennedys, right? There's a lot of those storied old time, many generation families whose wealth has just kind of been passed down from generation to generation. There's so much money they don't need to work, and this kind of stems back from England, right? When they had the classes of people in England, you had the landowner, wealthy families that kind of were handed down from titles, and those who were of the working class who kind of created their money and blurred the lines between those that stemmed from old titles and those who did not. So we don't have royalty in the United States, but the same idea of this you have so much money that's been handed down, you don't even need to work. And old money is considered reserved and refined. Okay, so meaning it was all about dressing the right way, talking the right way, acting the right way in the right circles. It's you think of men with those like monograms, right? They're like on a chain. They're one thing. They're like, I say, like kind of just stuck in the, stick in the mud types who are very, very formal in everything. And in the 1920s, old money was what everyone wanted, right? You wanted the lifestyle. Even if you couldn't get old money, you wanted the lifestyle of old money because it was yachts and giant houses and servants and, just basically the American dream wrapped up in an old money wrapper. Now, the new money is something that becomes pretty prevalent in the 1920s. Why? Well, because you could make a lot of money pretty quickly. So, new money means you weren't born with the money, that you or your parents made it. So, how could people be making the kind of money that would compete with old money during this time? Okay, so one, stock market, right? Stock market would be everyone, if you had the means to get into the stock market, it was a way for you to make a lot of money really quickly. So you could be new money because you made money in the stocks. The film industry was becoming, right? So entertainment was a way for you to have new money. You could be a movie star. You could be someone who's producing movies. So the people in the entertainment industry were not old money. They were new money, and obviously then didn't fit in with the old money crowd. And of course, during the 20s, during Prohibition, how could you make a lot of money? Bootlegging, right? The illegal sale of alcohol could cause you to become very, very rich. So, but transportation industry was booming, right? So there were ways that you could make a lot of money quickly. So some of the characteristics of new money, where you wanted people to know that you have a lot of money. So whereas old money didn't need to advertise that they had money because it was just an air that they carried, everyone knew. New money felt like they needed to kind of shout it, right, from the rooftops. And how would they do that? Gaudy, over the top, bling bling, as it says here on the slide, right? They want to, it's flashy clothes, flashy cars, flashy parties. And the old money types were really threatened by new money. We're not supposed to be a country that has like classes like England had, but it definitely felt like there was during the 20s. Old money resented and was very much afraid of new money. They felt that it was kind of poisoning and tainting their little like crowd and circle and their position. And they didn't like that there could be people that had this kind of money who did not fit in and didn't have the same background as old money types. And so this is what Fitzgerald exploits. And when you think about his background and stuff we talked about with his own life, right? I said it was loosely autobiographical, and there are elements of Fitzgerald's life that show up in this novel. This is an area. He was, remember, comfortable, but definitely not upper class in terms of his financial situation. He was from the Midwest. And so he came to Princeton, Fitzgerald, and never really felt like he was accepted by this old money New England crowd. Right. And so there's a little bit of this old money, new money dynamic that is happening here. He and Zelda would definitely have been considered new money when they were the it couple in New York. And he points out this respect issue in Gatsby, and we need to consider what he's trying to say by having this old money, new money conflict. All right. So when we're thinking about old money, new money, does it exist today? Absolutely. Not as obviously as it was in the 20s. Now, so these are two people who were pretty famous around the same time, Lindsay Lohan and Paris Hilton. And this is a really interesting comparison. So they both get into trouble at some point with the gossip rags, right? They both have drug problems. They both get arrested for drunk driving, and they both have sex scandals. They both made some bad movies, and they both had a singing career that didn't work out. As a result of these situations, Lindsay Lohan basically falls into oblivion, right? Loses all her endorsement deals, loses, credibility, just can't really work for a long period of time. Paris Hilton, if you recognize that last name, Paris Hilton is an heiress to the Hilton fortune, meaning the Hilton hotels and resorts. Think about all of the Hiltons that are everywhere, all around the world. That is a lot of money, right? So even though she had a lot of the same behavior issues that Lindsay Lohan has, Paris Hilton was not as affected by her mistakes because she is old money by old money standards. Okay. Paris, old money. So there's just even today some disagreements on this. Okay. So as we get into this first chapter, please keep that old money, new money situation at hand. All right. So let's get out of this and get into. So the first four chapters, the first four paragraphs of chapter 1 are really significant because it sets some of the groundwork for what's coming. So as you're reading, if you see the first, in my book, if you're using a hard copy, on page 2, at the bottom of page 2, you can see it. There we go. At the bottom of page 2, you see these 3 little dots. Sorry, I'm doing it backwards. So. See these 3 little dots right here? See them? 1, 2, 3. So that's kind of where the opening 4 paragraphs and the story of Gatsby actually begins. All right, so right out of the gate, we have some key some key information. So we get right away, my, and I've, my, right? So we get first person point of view. All right, so please make note, it is told from a first person point of view. And the person speaking is Nick Carraway. All right, so first person point of view, very important as we get started here. All right, so in my younger and more vulnerable years, my father gave me some advice that I've been turning over in my mind ever since. All right, and so then this is the advice, and that's where I want to kind of focus our attention right now. Whenever you feel like criticizing anyone, he told me, just remember that all the people in this world haven't had the advantages that you've had. All right, so that's the advice. Whenever you feel like you might want to criticize someone, remember all the people in the world haven't had the advantages that you've had. All right, so we have to think about that, right? So the word that I want to zero in on is advantages. So what do you think that means? This idea that people in the world haven't had the advantages that you've had. Well, what could advantages mean? Obviously, advantages for in this context means the way that he's been raised. So what could that look like? Education for sure, right? Haven't had the educational advantages that you've had. Obviously, it could mean money, haven't had the financial advantages that you've had. It can also obviously mean family situation, having parents involved who care, right? Who take care of him and help him. So when we talk about advantages, it could mean any number of things, probably all of the above, right? So we're going to come back to that and try to decide what he means by advantages after we've read a little bit. So his dad said, before you criticize other people for the way that they are behaving, acting, speaking, for whatever it is that someone else is doing, he says, stop for a minute and remember that they don't have what you've had in life, and so therefore might act in a different way. Okay, so that's the advice that Nick's father gives him. All right, so he didn't say any more, but we've always been unusually communicative in a reserved way. And I understood that he meant a great deal more than that. And that's what I mean by advantages, right? Don't be criticizing people. In consequence, I'm inclined to reserve all judgments. All right, so that's important too, right? This idea that he is reserving all judgments. Just trying to get my pen back. I don't know why I can't get my pen back. All right. So reserving all judgments. What does that mean? That means he doesn't jump to conclusions about people, right? Which is a pretty remarkable trait. The idea that you don't jump to conclusions about people based on first appearances, whether in the way that they speak, in the way that they look, in the way that they act. Right? That he doesn't jump to conclusions. All right. So why would Fitzgerald want Nick to tell us that he reserves judgments as a narrator? Obviously, he wants you to trust what's coming in the story, right? He wants you to feel that the information that you're being shared through Nick about this story is one that can be trusted because he hasn't included any bias in it. Now, whether or not that's possible, I leave you to think about for a little bit, right? So is it really possible to reserve judgment on people? Or by human nature, do we automatically make assumptions based on people when we meet them? All right, but he's saying, my dad gave me this advice not to criticize other people. And so as a result, I don't make judgments. I don't make judgments about the people I meet. And as a result, next part of the sentence, a habit that has opened up many curious natures to me and also made me the victim of not a few veteran bores. All right, so because he doesn't make judgments about people, people trust him. And so they open up to him and they trust him with things. The abnormal mind is quick to detect and attach itself to this quality when it appears in a normal person. All right, so you should automatically be chuckling to yourself a little bit. So just after he's telling you that he reserves judgments, he's telling you that the people who confide in him have an abnormal mind, right? Abnormal versus his, which is normal. So he's already made a judgment that people who find him, seek out his counsel, are the abnormal ones, and he's the normal one. Okay, so he's already making judgments. So you should already be kind of chuckling to yourself. So in college, he says, I was unjustly accused of being a politician because I was privy to the secret griefs of wild, unknown men. All right, so people told him things that they wouldn't tell other people. They'd come to him because he wouldn't judge whatever it was that they were telling him. Frequently, I feigned sleep, preoccupation, or a hostile levity when I realized by some unmistakable sign that an intimate revelation was quivering on the horizon. So it started to be so much that people would come to tell him their deep, dark secrets that he often had to fake being asleep, or that he was busy with something else, or that he wasn't in a mood to hear the story in order to have them stop, right? In order to get people to stop telling him things. And he says, right, for the intimate revelations of young men, or at least the terms in which they express themselves, are usually plagiaristic and marred by obvious suppressions. All right, so he's saying, the reason I didn't want to hear from all these college guys telling me their deep, dark secrets was because most of the time they're plagiaristic, which means that they are making it up or borrowing it from something else that they've heard, or marred by obvious suppressions, meaning they're not telling the whole story, right? So Nick's the kind of guy that people confess things to, things they don't talk about with other people. And once again, Nick is judging them by the fact that he believes most of the time what he's been told is made up or not the full story. But then we get this part, right? Reserving judgments is a matter of infinite hope. And that's, sorry, I'm having trouble today, folks. Sorry, I'll get it back. All right, so what we were talking about was reserving judgments is a matter of infinite hope. All right, so let's think about what that means for a little bit. Reserving judgments is a matter of infinite hope. So if you don't judge people when you first meet them, either by their appearance, their actions, whatever it is, if you leave yourself open and don't judge them, you can always think that the people will live up to your best desires for them or who they want to be, right? So you're constantly hoping that they are going to be wonderfully great people, right? That you haven't limited them from the start. And that's a pretty great idea, right? That if you don't judge people, then there's always the chance that they're going to be amazing, that they're always going to be great. Okay? So, all right. So what is going on here? This is all Fitzgerald getting you to want to like Nick, right? This idea that he doesn't judge, that he's aware of the benefits that he's had or the advantages that he's had in life, that he's conscious of the fact that people share things with him, so he tries not to judge them based on what he's told. All right, so that seems like it should make him a good narrator, someone we should trust and sympathize with. All right, and so then, right, so he says, I'm still a little afraid of missing something if I forget that, right? That reserving judgment is a matter of hope. As my father snobbishly suggested, and I snobbishly repeat. All right, so a sense of the fundamental decencies is parceled out unequally at birth. All right, so now notice he calls this a snobbish attitude, and it certainly is. All right, so we've now kind of narrowed down what he means by advantages. All right, so what does it mean to have fundamental decencies? All right, that's something that we need to think about. Fundamental decencies. So fundamental means basic, right? Basic what? What does it mean to be decencies? Basic, it could be behaviors, basic behaviors, but there's something more to decency, right? There's this moral or correctness to it. So basic, correct behaviors. That's what he's saying. A sense of the right way to do things, a sense of the right way to behave, the right way to think is not given out equally at birth. So the reason that would be considered snobbish is because it suggests that Nick and Nick's family have an understanding of what it means to be fundamentally decent, and other people do not. All right. So he's correct when he tells you that that's snobbish, right? That there's this idea that that there's a right way and a wrong way, that there's good things and good behaviors, and then there's bad behaviors. And everybody doesn't know what those are. All right, so that becomes important, that fundamental decencies aren't handed out equally. Everyone doesn't know the right way to behave. All right, so all of that, like I said, was a way for us to kind of get to know Nick a little bit. All right. All right, so then he says, and after boasting this way of my tolerance, meaning after explaining to you, reader, about how tolerant I am and non-judgmental, I come to the admission that that has a limit as well. All right, so next important line. Conduct may be founded on the hard rock or the wet marshes, but after a certain point, I don't care what it's founded on. All right, so this is a biblical allusion. And I'm wondering how many of you know this biblical story that that's talking about. All right, so he's talking about the fact that not everyone has been taught the right and good and moral way to behave. Everybody doesn't have fundamental decencies. And even though I tend not to try to judge people, there comes a point where even I can't take it anymore. And he says, conduct may be founded on the hard rock or the wet marshes. So that's a biblical allusion to the story of, there's a parable that Jesus tells about how building your house, and there's the people who build their house on sand or wet ground. And what happens to houses that are built on wet ground? They wipe away, right? And then, or they are built on hard rock where there's a solid foundation and the house is able to withstand storms. And that is a parable that talks about the foundations of faith, right? This idea that if you build your faith from a solid foundation on hard rock, that it will last when it's tested, that it will last through trials and tribulations, versus those who don't establish that good foundation. They build it on wet, marshy ground, and then when trouble comes, the house can't stand. So he's saying that, all right, everybody doesn't have a good sense or hasn't been taught from being young about fundamental decencies, their conduct. Some people don't understand. And some people's conduct can be founded on hard rock and can have the good foundations. They have an understanding of fundamental decencies. And some people don't. They build it on wet marshes. And he's saying, but at some point, whether they've been taught it or not, whether they know it or not, the conduct is so bad that I can't take it anymore. And he's saying that at some point, your background and upbringing doesn't matter anymore. And then he's telling us, right, some specifics. When I came back from the East last autumn. All right, so why is that important? It's important because it sets up time. All right, so this part, these opening four paragraphs, these opening four paragraphs of chapter 1, they are in present time. All right, so he's telling you this from the present. So we know that the story of Gatsby is in the past. Everything that's happened in this book has already occurred, and he's going to go back and tell you about it. So you need to be aware. This is not the only time that he talks to the reader from the present tense. And you need to be aware as you read when those shifts happen, okay? So in the opening chapter, the shift begins right here. All right, so this is where the story begins when he starts talking about the back east, the summer in the past. All right, so you need to be mindful of when these changes in time occur. All right, so these opening 4 paragraphs are in the present, and Nick's telling you about himself and what happened to him back east. And then he begins to tell you the story. Okay, so please be mindful of that. All right, so he came back. All right, so where is he now? Obviously somewhere that isn't the east. Okay, so he went to the east and then came back. And then I can tell you that he's in the Midwest. Okay, so Nick Carraway's from the Midwest. So he went east in last summer, and now he's back in the Midwest. So when I came back from the East last autumn, I felt that I wanted the world to be in uniform and at a sort of moral attention forever. All right, so a couple things. All right, so so he's, somebody who's not used to judging, but then he goes east, and whatever happened in the East, he came back to the Midwest, and he was sick and tired of hearing about or watching people whose conduct was not evidently fundamentally decent. And he wanted people to act uniformly, and he wanted some sort of clear moral boundaries, right? So that is suggesting, right? When you're in uniform means everything's the same, right? And so he wanted it to be, it sounds militaristic, right? The idea of being at, attention and in uniform. And when you think of military, you think of ordered and clear and defined. So whatever happened when he was back east, it was not uniform and there was no moral attention, right? It was something chaotic and he wanted it to be much more defined. He couldn't handle it anymore. All right. And then he goes on to say, I wanted no more rioted excursions with privileged glimpses into the human heart. All right. So that goes back to what he was telling us in the beginning, the fact that people share things with him, that people open up to him. And so he was evidently somebody who learned about other people's human hearts and why they did things and their actions. And he didn't want to know about it anymore. I didn't want any more trips with privilege into the way people behave and what they do. All right. I wanted everyone to be morally clear, and I wanted everyone to behave the same way. I didn't want any chaos. Only Gatsby, the man who gives his name to this book, was exempt from my reaction. So the only person that I wasn't fed up with was Gatsby. So when I came back from the East, and I wanted everyone to be the same, and I didn't want to hear about anyone's behaviors, and I didn't want to be witness to crazy. I wanted everything to be at a moral attention. But the only one that I didn't find fault with after I came back was Gatsby. He was exempt from my reaction. But then there's this paradox. The only one that I cared to think about anymore was Gatsby. But Gatsby represented everything for which I have an unaffected scorn. Scorn, right? That he looked down on, that he found faulty. So Gatsby represents everything that I openly and clearly have a problem with, and yet Gatsby is the only one that I cared to think about when I came back from the East. All right, so he stands for everything I dislike, and yet he's the only one that I still respected. That should not make sense to you because, right? Because it doesn't make sense. If he stands for everything that you hated, why is he the one that you still care to talk about, right? That you still had some respect for? That's the question we need to consider. What is it about Gatsby that puts him in a different place? If personality is an unbroken series of successful gestures, then there was something gorgeous about him. So he had a series of successful gestures. All right, so if we judge personality about people doing things successfully, then Gatsby was just gorgeous, right? Everything about Gatsby was successful. He had a series of successes. If that's what we judge people on, then he was at the top. What was it about him? He had a heightened sensitivity to the promises of life. All right, meaning he seemed to have this idea that life could bring dreams, that dreams could come true, that life could be a series of successful accomplishments, right? That he was so in tune to the promises of life that he was like a machine that registered earthquakes, right? It wasn't that he was a creative temperament. It wasn't that. It was this. And please, if you remember nothing else from this opening lecture, please remember this. Why is it then that even though Gatsby is somebody that he finds completely distasteful, why is it that he still talks about him with respect? Because Gatsby had an extraordinary gift for hope, hope to the promises of life. He was a hopeful person, a dreamer, a romantic readiness such as I have never found in any other person, and which is not likely I shall ever find again. So Gatsby's the exception because he dared to dream and he dared to hope. He dared to try to find the promises of life. All right, so when we talk about dreams and goals, you can't help but add American in front of it. All right, so I've talked to you about the fact that this is a novel about the American dream. And so this opening paragraph tells us that Gatsby was a dreamer, and there's something about the way that he looked at life, this extraordinary gift for dreaming, that Nick found respectable, that Nick found fascinating. And that's why Gatsby is the one who's exempt from the fact that he didn't want anything to do with the East after he came back from it. All right, and so then he finishes up by saying, no, Gatsby turned out all right in the end. It's what preyed on Gatsby. Preyed on Gatsby. All right, so notice Prey suggests that there's something that Gatsby is a victim, right? Something is preying on him, meaning that he's the victim and something is attacking him, something is exploiting him, right? So it's not that Gatsby was okay. It's whatever's preying on Gatsby. What foul dust floated in the wake of his dreams. All right. So it's not that Gatsby's terrible. It's not that Gatsby is awful. It's what was preying on Gatsby. It's whatever the foul dust that followed his dreams is. And so what you should be considering is, what is the foul dust? What does that mean? What foul dust floated in the wake of his dreams? What was preying on Gatsby? It's those things that cause Nick to not want to associate with people anymore. Okay? Because that's what he says, that temporarily closed down my interest in the abortive sorrows and short-winded elations of men. I didn't want to be around people. I didn't want to get involved with people anymore. Not because of Gatsby, but because of what preyed on Gatsby, what foul dust floated in the wake of his dreams, behind his dreams, right? What happened behind, or what after the dreams. So he admires Gatsby, even though he despises everything that Gatsby stands for, because Gatsby's a dreamer. All right? Okay, so that's a lot to take in from the opening 4 paragraphs here. But it sets up a lot of information, right? We know that the story is going to be told from the future, or the present rather. So it's Nick in the present going back to talk about the summer that he came east from the Midwest. And so 1922, right? Remember, that's when this is happening. Okay, so what am I looking for you guys to do today? I am going to be asking you to finish chapter 1. Actually, that's not true. That's too much. All right. So what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to read from where we picked up. All right. So beginning with here, right here, beginning with here, my family have been prominent, which is on page 3. So I want you to read from 3 to let's say 3 to I'm going to go all the way to page 11. Okay. So you're going to pick it up and you're going to read up until right here. All right. You're going to end right here after this little conversation that says, "You must know Gatsby. Gatsby," demanded Daisy. "What Gatsby?" And then this is when they move into dinner. So in the hard copy book, it's the middle of page 11. So if you're following along in the book, you're reading till the middle of page 11. If you're using this electronic version, it's right here on the middle of page 14. Okay. So that's what you're reading up to. Now, you're going to meet most of the major players in the book. So you're going to listen to Nick's background of how he gets east and why. You're going to meet Tom Buchanan. you're going to meet Daisy Buchanan, and you're going to meet Jordan Baker. So I want you to make note in your books and on your notes as you're reading the characteristics that Fitzgerald gives us about the major players in the story. All right, so really important because this is exposition. We need to understand, right, the direct characterization and indirect characterization that we get at the beginning of the novel so that we can understand these characters moving forward. All right, now, the other thing I want you to do, I will be posting these are chapter questions. So you are going to read you're going to do questions 1 through 6. Okay? Questions 1 through 6 and I will post these. So you will answer questions 1 through 6, please. You do not have to send them to me. You just need to have them done. Again, these questions help create your study guide, okay? So if you don't do them or you don't read, you're not going to be able to do well on the test. So please answer them and in your notebooks and leave some space after your answers to add information that I give you as we go through the book, okay? So for Wednesday, you are reading up to the middle of page 11 in the hard text or the middle of page 14 on the digital text, and you are answering questions 1 through 6 on the question page that I will post to Edmodo. Okay? Wonderful. If you have any questions, just email me. Otherwise, I will talk to you all on Wednesday. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.